Hello, and welcome to the Mobile User Acquisition Show, a podcast to help you unlock tremendous growth for your app. My name is Shamant Rao. I'm the CEO of the boutique growth marketing firm Rocketship HQ and host of the podcast Mobile User Acquisition Show. In each episode, we feature experts in the field of mobile growth and discuss strategies, tips, and pointers from the leading edge of mobile growth marketing. By the end of each episode, you will have gained actionable and tactical insights that will help you make more informed decisions in your own work around growth. The Mobile User Acquisition Show is produced by Meryl Vincent, Content Marketing Manager at Rocketship HQ.
Our guest today is Michael Taylor. Mike is the co-founder of Vexpower, a platform that hosts simulator-based courses for data-driven marketers who want to be more technical. Prior to this, Mike co-founded and led the team at ladder.io. Mike is also going to be launching a book called Marketing Memetics, which is expected to be out soon. I'm very excited to welcome Mike Taylor to the Mobile UA show. Mike, welcome and welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back because as I was telling you just before we hit record, you're among the few people I know that has been writing with a lot of insight and experience around creative. And I've certainly appreciated a lot of what you've written. And so I'm excited to dive into our interview today. To get started, right? So, you've written about meme mapping.
Yep.
So the word meme has a very specific connotation in what you write about and what you speak about. And it's not just funny cat videos. So can you help explain what it means?
Yeah, exactly. So most people don't realize that the word meme actually predates the internet. So it was coined by an evolutionary biologist, actually, Richard Dawkins. If you've read The Selfish Gene, that's where he coined the term meme. It was 1976. So what it really means, it's an analogy to the word gene. And what he's trying to use that analogy for is essentially just like your genes can evolve over time and you kind of develop stronger features or functions as a species to help you fit the environment that you're in. The same thing happens with information. So with our culture, a lot of the cultural artifacts that we have, anything literally from ways of making bows and arrows through to different words or phrases that we use that have meaning we might use in a specific industry. All of those things replicate over time and they evolve. And you can actually apply the principles of evolution and some of the tools from biology to the evolution of information as well as.
Yeah, certainly. Right. And I know in the context of memes, you talked and written about how memes are borrowed.
Yep.
Right. So again, applying the idea of memes to advertising.
Yep.
How might an advertiser come up a meme map or a territory of ideas or concepts, if you will, for whatever they're advertising? How might they go about doing that?
Yeah, so meme mapping is a term that I kind of coined as a way to kind of figure out the application of memetics to marketing. And it's something that I was doing for a long time without really realizing it and without having a name for it. So functionally, how it works is a really good example I found recently is James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. So he said when he wrote his book, he really, really wanted to make sure that it was positioned to be a bestseller, right? So he did an analysis. He actually did some research to find the top 150 business books that sold over $1 million in sales. And he started to look for patterns. And specifically talking about the title, he kind of noticed some recurring patterns. It said quite often it was the topic of the book as the second word. And the first word that you pair with it would be something that's not usually associated with the topic. So the subtle art of not giving a F that book is like not giving an F. That's like not normally a subtle thing, right? Atomic habits, right? Habits are not normally seen as atomic. Basically did this analysis, noticed that pattern. And because he had seen 150 of these books and started to see what was emerging, he could then kind of use that pattern for his book title as well. And I think in general, like this is essentially what designers, what copywriters do, but meme mapping is really a way to accelerate that. It's kind of coming from the perspective of someone who's data driven. I don't particularly see myself as a creative type, but through running Facebook ads, Google ads, etc., I had to learn how to make creative, and I wanted kind of a framework. So for me, the way I do it is I go out kind of like James Clear. I go and build a swipe file of, basically all the examples of success in a specific domain that I want to conquer. And then I tag those recurring patterns and I start to see, okay, well, it looks like ads in, say, for example, you're looking in the Facebook ad library, right? And you might look at D2C e-commerce businesses, right? Casper, Harry's, all these businesses. You can spot some recurring themes in the ads that they use. And once you kind of have that map, the list of tags that either are associated with the successful examples, or maybe you're associated with the least successful examples, like the ones to avoid, then it's really up to you to kind of choose where you go on that map. Essentially, right? It's not going to tell you exactly make this decision or don't make this decision, but it's really important to know. And then you can decide what to copy and then where to innovate and where to kind of do something differently than the rest of the category.
Yeah, right. And what I'm hearing you say is it's very important to have some sort of taxonomy, right? Some sort of system of tagging or classification. And I know you use the word swipe file, and that's certainly been used by marketers, direct response copywriters for over a century now, where they've collected ads even before they were digital, print ads at the time, right? And really having a system of saying, here's why we think this might be winning, right? Yeah, and you also just mentioned and reached out about our creative newsletter, which I'm sending out. And that's definitely built on the same premise, which is, can we tag different ads that may be seemingly very different? For gaming, I think it can be somewhat easier because there are player motivations, players seeking progression, players seeking relaxation, and certainly for DTC or non-gaming, you can have very different kinds of motivations, which could be, does this show ease of use? Does this show a cute character, right? So I think just figuring out what that taxonomy can be.
Gaming in general, like I'm almost like envious of you being so deeply embedded in the gaming industry, because looking at it, like gaming companies are, I think, usually at the forefront of creative testing. I think because there's no underlying substance, right? You're not like selling a pair of shoes that's going to arrive, right? Like you're selling a distraction, right? Like a way to entertain yourself. And it's the best business in the world in terms of margin, right? Like if you get a successful game, but there's so much competition because of that. So it's really a marketing game, like the gaming people are playing. So I think that they tend to, just like in any ecosystem, right? Like evolutionary pressure is going to create a lot of innovation, like a lot more innovation is happening in gaming creative testing than there are in like slower moving industries where they don't really feel that pressure as much.
Yeah, definitely, right. And in fact, one of the trends that came out over the last couple of years in gaming was fake ads. And that's very common in gaming, right? So there's fake ads, but there's also ads that I've seen that are run for non-gaming apps. Certainly a number of wellness apps have what we call soothing, satisfying ads. There's been a time when I see literally every medication app's been showing rain falling or a tree blowing in the wind. And the ads that show are based on TikTok trends, right? So when I see a lot of this, what I take away is that, a lot of these ads and advertisers are borrowing from different memes that may not be native to their vertical. So in those cases, if an advertiser wants to borrow from an unrelated or an adjacent meme, how do you recommend thinking about which ones to borrow from and which ones to avoid?
So you can almost think about this as like memetic arbitrage, right? You're finding a generally popular meme and then building your association, of using it as a honeypot really to get your less popular but more commercially valuable memes into there, right? I think in general, innovation happens when you cross-pollinate between industries. Like Steve Jobs, I really love this anecdote, but apparently Steve Jobs got a lot of the idea for the Mac design from studying like blenders and like food processors, because he looked at the Cuisinart food processor and thought, this is a piece of technology that people feel comfortable with in their homes. And at the time, people didn't really feel comfortable with a home computer. So he thought, if I can kind of borrow some of the look, the feel, the design from this, I can cross-pollinate across to consumers. I think in general, you shouldn't just copy memes wantonly, right? Just because something is popular, it doesn't mean you should jump on the bandwagon, because it can face rejection, right? Like the people who like that meme, like it kind of, it's like when you see a brand posting about, whatever latest thing is trending, just like their opinion's not really wanted, right? Like it's not a natural home for them, and it comes across as quite fake and lame. And I think people are pretty good at spotting authenticity. I think in general, where it works really well is if you borrow memes from another category that your target customer likes already. So a really good example, we did a lot in the fintech space with Monzo Bank. So I always remember them as an example. They were a challenger bank in the UK, grew to, I think it's past 3 million accounts now, best rated bank in the UK actually. But they targeted mostly students, and their card is like bright orange, right? Which is very different from a normal bank. And I think a lot of challenger banks have kind of copied that now. But the reason apparently was because one of the early designers had bright orange Nikes, and he said, why don't we just make the card this color, right? And I mean, that's the right thing, right? Like their customers, the students that they're trying to target, they loved bright colored shoes and clothes, right? So why not make the card that color as well, and it stands out? It's a meme that attracts more attention, and from an evolutionary point of view, memes that get remembered or stand out, persist longer over time and get talked about, right? So I think that's a really good example of, it's not just people in general like orange shoes, right? Most people don't, but the target audience did, and therefore you kind of feel more relevant and more fresh to those students if they kind of spot the memes that they like from fashion, and you see that in industry where they don't normally belong, like in banking.
Yeah, certainly. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? And just to go from the qualitative to the quantitative, right? So once you have a universe of ideas that you're ready to test, how do you figure out how many tests to run and how often?
Yeah, I mean, this is getting harder and harder. Back in the good old days, you used to be able to do, thousands of micro targeting kind of audiences, and you could split test everything. Actually, I started in Google Ads, and everything was split testing creative, and we'd do the analysis in Excel and stuff. But today, I think it's much harder. Post iOS 14, it's much harder, especially if you're a mobile app. You'd only get so many slots, right, in terms of tracking through scan. And then also there's a bit of a delay in the data that you get back. So I would say you should only really test, like actually test your most existentially important things, right? So we used to call this performance branding, and we would either pre-launch before a company was about to launch a product, or even after launch, if you want to kind of test a new creative direction, we would do that. We would actually kind of make the creatives, we would run proper split tests, but it would be at the big conceptual level. So I'll go back to fintech example. There are people who care about cheap foreign currency, right? Because they travel a lot. And then there are people who care about splitting the bill with friends. So if you advertise the splitting the bill with friends, that might work really, really well with students. It might work terribly with people in my demographic. And equally, like if you advertise foreign exchange, that might work actually well with both groups, or, but it wouldn't work well with a different group. And those are existentially important questions, because if you're deciding whether to focus your product on one of those use cases or not, you can actually kind of test that beforehand with advertising and see what the response is. And they actually have big implications in terms of profitability, like the Capital One is very expensive to supply, right? Whereas a bill splitting feature is very, once you build it, it's like zero cost. So I think people should really get into the habit of using marketing and product together and testing those really existentially important things, being very wise with the number of slots they use in their testing regime.
Yeah, certainly, right. And I think the pre-ATT world kind of spoiled a lot of us when we were like, let's just change this one font, or let's just change this one color and see what happens. Sometimes we did find statistical significance, but it's just not practical post-ADT to, get such granular reads.
Yeah, honestly, it was always hard to get statistical significance, right? Like we were kidding ourselves most of the time. I ran a growth agency, right? So I was guilty of this as well. Like we ran 8,000 experiments at Ladder, and only a third of them actually were statistically significant. I mean, we actually kept track, but most people don't now. So I think now I'm like a radicalist on testing. I'm like, it should always be opinion driven unless it's existentially important, right? And in which case you need to put like a good budget behind it, and it needs to be a very big change, because statistical significance isn't just a function of like how much budget you spend or how much traffic you get or the conversion rate, but it's also how big the difference is, right? Like if you're just testing font colors and borders, Google can do that. They have billions of searches a day, right? But like you can't do that if you're like a mobile game, right? So I would say like, leave split testing everything to like the big companies. And if you're just trying to kind of figure out what's the next feature to build, or what type of game should I be making, then just keep it to the one or two things that are important.
Yeah, certainly. Right. And let's just say you're operating at large budgets and you're testing a lot of creators. Approvals can be a big part of the picture. What are some
another good reason? Another good reason not to waste any testing slots, right? Because it takes a long time to get this stuff approved.
Certainly, right. So what are some of the ways that you manage approvals at scale?
Yeah, we got blindsided by this at Ladder quite a lot, right? Like we started off with small clients, like even idea stage startups. And then eventually we started to pick up bigger clients. And, we were working eventually with Fortune 500 companies in some cases. I actually ran some Facebook ads for Facebook once, which is pretty fun. I had signed off by Sheryl Sandberg, which is kind of nice. Like way back in the email chain, like I never got to talk to her. But yeah, I mean, when you have a bottleneck like that, like when legal has to approve the ads, right? Like when ad approval might take a long time, or even just like when you just have a lot of internal stakeholders that want to give a helpful opinion, right? And they want to make sure that it's on brand, they want to make sure it's good, they want to make sure that their ideas have been heard. Then I think that you have to optimize everything else in the process around that one bottleneck. There's a really good book that I read, I think it's called The Goal. If you recommend,
I love that.
It's a really good. So it's this one that's specifically about manufacturing, but the same principle applies. You have to overwhelm the bottleneck, right? So the way we do it, we used to call it like creative lake. Basically, you should be filling up your reservoir of already approved creative, and I think the key is it needs to be modular, right? So can't be like, I want to show this one ad, right? You have to say, can you approve these 6 stock photos, right? And can you approve these 7 like illustrations? And I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to pair it with yet, right? Like, but I just need to know that they're approved. And then in isolation, you have another like 20 copy lines, and you say, can I use these copy lines? And as long as it's modular like that, then you can always roll out a new variation, because you essentially just, if you add another copy line, that's one copy line, but you could try it with 20 different images, right? So that's 20 new variations to test. So I think the modularity is key. Building up that lake of approved creative is key. And then just like always making sure that you have something like ready to demo in the legal review. Or, like I used to did some Google ads for Capital One. And, obviously a bank, like they're very conservative. We had one creative approval session every 3 months. And if I missed that session, or if we didn't have, if the copywriter didn't finish in time, then I'd have to wait another 3 months to get things approved. So we made sure that, copy was done like weeks and weeks ahead of that date. And that we had like, when we went in, we had more things to review than they had the time to review in the session, right? So we always built up that kind of work in progress ahead of that deadline. However much time they would give us, we would always have something for them to check.
Yeah. And I think just the way you mentioned the goal, I think that's very appropriate, because I have also been thinking about applying the theory of constraints to knowledge work. Right. And really what he talks about is make everything subservient to the bottleneck. Build up a buffer before the bottleneck, which are just the principles you just outlined and described, because the approval bandwidth is so scarce. You can't just wait, if you have a approval once in 3 months, then you just can't, take it for granted, if you will.
Yeah, and you can actually do a lot of things that would normally be seen as wasteful, but actually in light of the bottleneck, not really wasteful. I would not just give that task to one copywriter or one designer. I would actually go on Upwork and find like 3 more And I would actually pay 4 times as much just so that I'm sure within those 4 people I have something usable, right? And I knew that I was going to have some, because I had that creative review session on Wednesday or whatever, and I knew like one of those bets would pay off. And in the grand scheme of things, if you have a $20,000 a month client in terms of fees, like the difference between paying like $100 and $500 for creative is nothing, right? Like, because if you show up with crap creative or you don't show up with creative, you could lose the 20,000. You know? So, it might seem inefficient to have 4 different people working on the same task, but in light of the bottleneck, it's actually efficient, you know?
100%. And we do something very similar with UGCs where we have to hire actors outside of our team. We're like, what if an actor bails last minute? And we learned that the hard way, right? The entire project is delayed if somebody's bailing last minute. So we're like, we'll just hire more actors than we need. And that helped us. So,
Like one of my clients right now is Recast, a marketing mix modeling tool. I think maybe I talked about it a little bit last time, but for them, like we send out one blog post every week in the newsletter, but I actually have 12 weeks of blog posts built up now because I've just been building them up and I'm still keeping the deadline of 1 per week. But today I got an email from one of the writers and they said, I'm based in a country where there's troubles right now and I can't get the blog post. And I'm like, no sweat, just take your time. Because I know I have 12 weeks.
Certainly. Mike, this has been very fascinating. And certainly I think we could do another episode on period constraints.
We could probably spend a whole day talking about that.
Yeah. But this would perhaps be a good place for us to wrap up this interview. Before we do that, can you tell folks how they can find out more about you, everything you do, and also your upcoming book?
Yeah, so the 2 of the concepts I talked about, meme mapping and performance branding, they're both based off my experience at Ladder. And the book, about 80% through editing, it's called Marketing Memetics, right? And it's on this topic of memetics. It includes those examples. And it's really the book that I wish I had when we were this data-driven team of creative testing, media buyers, and we had like no idea what to do in branding conversations. And we had no idea how to handle, how to come up with good creative ideas when we couldn't test as many times as we liked. So it's really that handbook for getting over that. So it's marketingmemetics.com if you want to see that. And then on Twitter, I'm hammer_MT. And you can indulge my Twitter addiction further by messaging me there.
Excellent. And we'll link to your book, we'll link to your Twitter and LinkedIn as well. But it has been a pleasure having you, Mike. And this is a good place for us to wrap up. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
For more tips, pointers, and strategies from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition, subscribe to our YouTube channel right here, or check out our blog, rocketship.hq.com/blog.